Welcome back to Arborescent. Since the beta launch, I've had some requests to give more details on my workflow and how I actually use Arborescent. So in this video, we'll be building a new feature from start to finish. The idea for the feature is actually the workflow functionality itself. Currently, there's no formal workflow feature. It's emergent from the user's own structure. As this is a core Arborescent concept, we need to formalize it. So let's jump right in and create the basic specification. For now, it's just living in my ideas node. So let's grab that and stick it into the backlog. Just move that up to the top. So we need to give it specification. So let's start with problem statement. So what is the problem? Well, it's right now the workflows are up to the user to define their emergent feature of the blueprint functionality. Which I've kind of done here in my layout. As you can see, the issue with that is that it doesn't tell the user that there's such thing as a workflow, that they can define them, that they can export them in blueprints for other people to use. There's no visual indicator, and also if they're working on a functionality, they have to copy and paste that between the various steps by hand, which is a bit of a pain. So we can do better than that. So just type out this problem statement here. Also, there's no visual indicators to show you that there's a workflow in place other than the names that you might give the nodes and the icons that you might give them. So we need something to distinguish workflows visually. That's going to be especially important for blueprint exports. And finally, I'd like to start preparing for potential agentic workflows in later versions. I'm still unsure about if that's a good idea to cede that much control to the machine. I think if we can find a way eventually to curtail those workflows with the right context and have have a fine control on that context, I think we'll still be maintaining sufficient control for that to work. But it's for a later day. But it's one of the reasons why I want to start building this out. Right. So the actual acceptance criteria themselves. So first of all, we want to be able to right-click on a blueprint node, go to blueprint and declare it as a workflow. Actually, not necessarily a blueprint node. It could be any node that's a child of a blueprint. So can but not grandchildren or ancestors other than immediate children, because that would mean then we have to apply that blueprint to ancestor nodes where they didn't previously exist. We need some visual indications once we've actually applied a workflow to something. I think a little play symbol to the left of the workflow node would be not bad. We can see how that looks visually after. And then the children of the workflow node should just be a numbered list. And we want those numbers to be small and just kind of like centered in the middle left of each node icon. I forgot to mention something here. So a workflow node is automatically a blueprint node. Same as context nodes. And when we change any of the child nodes, the numbers are recalculated. So what actually happens when a node is designated as a workflow? We just get our terminology right. It's called a workflow node, and the children are called workflow steps. And what happens when we right-click on it? When we right-click on a workflow step, rather. So the first option in the list is next step. The context menu. Well, let's just specify right-click context menu, because we're not talking about the Arborescent context here. Oh, well, if it exists, because we might be at the end of the list. Second option is obviously previous step if it exists. And then clicking on it moves the node to the next or last step as appropriate. Clicking on it. Just important to specify here that it's a move, it's not a copy, so it retains all its metadata. And it reuses the existing move functionality, which is undoable and redoable. Also, I want that little visual effect that happens when we copy and paste something we can see here, like that. So it's just going to be reusing the same code. It should be fairly straightforward for Claude Code to cable that up. Is there anything else I need to think of here? Yeah, okay, so when a node is designated as a workflow, then when we right-click and go to blueprints, there's an option there to remove it. Okay, this also removes the children as workflow steps. So now we have our basic specification. Let's review that with some AI assistance. So we can see down here, we have already a functional context or review context. And the purpose of this is to let the AI know about already the project philosophy, which is hyperlinked in here. So the design philosophy, just reminded to read the README on, what the actual tool is about. And then just trying to get it to think like a product manager and not a software developer. Point out any questionable choices, challenge the ROI, if there's any bad UX design, that kind of thing. So that context is already attached here in the backlog, which means it's going to be available to any descendants. So we should just need to right click on that and send it to the terminal. Well, let's launch Claude Code first. Collaborate in terminal. Just a note here, Claude Code has a tendency to start messing up display-wise when there's a lot of processing going on, or if there's a lot of content copied and pasted into it. So I have this little anchor feature, which is enabled by default, which basically sticks the terminal to the bottom. If you want to scroll up and see what's happening, you just need to uncheck that. And you can see the context that was sent. So it just starts with some basic hard-coded instructions, and then it sends the context that we've created down here in the context section of the blueprint that we've already seen. And then it specifies to Claude or any other AI what the output format is that we expect. And it tells it where to write that output format to. Well, we can't see it anymore, but it basically tells it to write it into this temp file, which Arborescent is watching. So let's let it do that. So once it's written into the temp file, Arborescent picks up on that and opens the feedback panel. And that's where we can review and edit or answer questions that the AI has asked us, and basically refine our acceptance criteria with in collaboration with the AI tool we're using. So let's see here what it's telling us. I think it's more or less kept our specification, so we're on the right track. It seems to have some questions. Does the place symbol replace the existing blueprint icon or appear alongside it? The spec should clarify this to avoid visual clutter. Yeah, fair enough. I think here I should have said to the left of the workflow nodes, blueprint icon does not replace the icon. So that should be okay. And it's got another question down here. When we right click on a workflow step, this section is ambiguous about what moves the node means. Do you mean right clicking on child descendant of a workflow step and moving that child to the next step? Yes, I made a mistake. So when we right click on a child of a workflow step, yeah, that should be okay. And here, where in the destination step does the moved node land first child, last child, same position index? That's a good question. So I think we want to move that to the first child, because if we're working on the feature, we're going to want it to be first in the list. Okay, so here it has some observations for us. First is the only immediate children of an existing blueprint node constraint means you cannot create a workflow at root level. Is this intentional? Well, actually we can. I didn't check the repo, but the root node in Arborescent, you can't actually see it. There's a root node, and just for practical purposes, that is already defined as a blueprint. Next, the numbered stepped indicators add a new visual element to an already dense gutter area. Blueprint icons, contact icons, checkboxes. Consider whether the numbers carry enough day-to-day value, or if the sequential order of children already communicates this. The play icon on the parent may be sufficient. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I think the numbers are important because the play icon on its own is a little ambiguous. I think it's going to be nice to see that we've got steps there, and to have numbers describing those steps is just visually pleasant. And I think we're going to be able to work that out with some CSS so that it's not too in your face. And then if next step, previous step is just moving a node to the next sibling of its parent, and more general, move to the next previous sibling of parent command available on any node, just workflows would solve the original copy-paste problem without introducing the workflow concept at all. The workflow designation would then only be needed for visual indicators and blueprint sharing. Yeah, that's actually quite interesting what it's saying. So if we had them both kind of independently, next step, previous step doesn't necessarily have to be tied into the workflow concept. I quite like that. It does mean that we're going to have to rework our acceptance criteria, but let's just ask the AI to split that into two first. We could potentially have two user stories. So yeah, I like that. So we're saying that next step, previous step is going to be added everywhere. Well, actually, let me just rethink that. I mean, we see here, if we right click on something, we're already a little cluttered. I mean, one of the things about Arborescent is I want to avoid visual clutter, so I didn't want to add in like a toolbar with lots of actions. And it's why for the moment I think we're getting away with a right-click context menu because there's not that stuff in it. There's not that much stuff in it. If we start adding more visual elements to it, it does become a little cluttered. So the idea was to have it contextual. Is adding two more items at the start going to be annoying? I don't know. I mean, it means we've got to go down with the mouse a little bit further before we click on execute or collaborate. Or we could put next previous steps in edit, but they're kind of hidden depending on the context. Yeah, I think I'm just going to leave that to user feedback. Let's keep those steps integrated. Let's keep the two scenarios integrated for now, and we can see if there's common demand to have that more general next previous step functionality later on. I mean, I don't have to tell the AI all this. I can just say no. But I think it's useful in a working session if you explain your reasoning because it helps it reason about things later on if you decide to make a change, or sometimes it can affect the implementation. So then finally, the spec doesn't address what happens when a workflow step has children of its own. Can workflow steps have subtasks? If a step is moved, reordered, do its children follow? Actually, that's a very good point. So I think what we want to do is just for a first version, just put in a general rule saying that you can't have a workflow within a workflow. And I think honestly, the use case that we're implementing today will probably cover most needs, and we can see if there's feedback later on if people do want embedded workflows. So a workflow can't be created within another workflow. In any of the descendants of another workflow. So I think we can delete that because we've answered it above. So we've got some responses to the AI's questions here, and we've also possibly got some duplication in our list. We can clean that up later, so let's accept it for now and write it back into our tree. And there's another context down here that I'd like to use just to give it another pass. So if we see functional contexts, restructure. So it's basically just restructure the list, remove any duplication, preserve all unique information, and reorder it logically. So that's a good way to clean up the acceptance criteria. AI is pretty good at that kind of problem. So now, because this has the default context from backlog, we do need to give it its own context in order to get it to use that one. So we can do that very quickly here. Refine acceptance criteria and then collaborate in terminal. Okay, so it seems to have cleaned that right up and has kept her deferred decision. Well, that might be useful for later. Okay, well, that looks good. So let's accept that and write it back into our working tree. And so we've got a nicely specified feature here. And so we can go ahead and start coding that. First, I'm just going to remove that refine acceptance criteria context because what I want to do is just grab that whole feature and let's just paste it into the next part of the process. So here we go to in progress, which is the next part of the workflow, and paste it into major feature. Expand it again. So this will inherit the major feature context. So let's go down and have a look at that. So it's a technical context. Collapse functional, open technical. And implement a major feature references implement feature. So it's pulling in this content into its context. And then it's adding the standard checks, which are actions, which are here. And that's just like do the test pass, is there linting, TypeScript okay, and reminder for the AI not to commit. I prefer to do that myself. Not so that everybody thinks I've coded by hand, because it's obviously not the case, but I do prefer to have the hand on the commit messages and when to actually commit. What else is in there? Well, it references the project conventions, which are here, and this is really the kind of meat of what you can do in terms of defining technical context for an AI. As you can see here, I tell it how I want persistence of the temporary files or project files to happen, how I would like for the tests to be written, performance considerations, kind of specific to React, use memo, use callback, selectives of stance descriptions, that kind of thing, code style. You get the idea. So let's get rid of that. Yeah, and just some implementation guidelines as well. Actually, I could probably move these into conventions. I've got a little bit of refactoring to do here within my own blueprint, but it seems to work fairly well. So one thing I do want to add is I want to try a TDD workflow. I've resisted doing it in the past because, what I was thinking was because we've already refined the acceptance criteria with the AI, that they kind of resemble test cases that you might specify if you're doing test-driven development. So I thought maybe it was redundant, but in thinking about it, I think, making it actually write the test first will force it to frame things in a certain way once it's actually writing them down. And I think it just give a little bit more granularity and control before it starts implementing the features. It'll, I hope, make it go and analyze the code base as well. So that could be a useful first step without specifying that as a separate step, which could use up extra tokens. So I think we're going to add that here into implement feature, and we have a quality assurance. And actually, it looks like I've added this earlier. So use a TDD approach, write unit tests before coding anything else. Yeah, well, that sounds good. Just put that on a next node down. So, okay, so let's go with that. Just collapse our nodes here before we start, just to get a clearer view. One thing to note, one thing I like to do before I start actually implementing a feature, especially if I've been using Claude Code to help with product management side of things and the refinement. It's got quite a busy context window here. If we reuse the existing Claude session, it's got all that context from the review request that we've asked it to do, which might interfere with the new context that we're going to send it for the feature implementation. So I usually like to just close that out and start another session from fresh. It shouldn't need any more context than the context we're giving it anyway. Yeah, so let's just send this. So yeah, here you can see that it's sent to quite a lot of stuff. It doesn't really use any more tokens, though. Well, very minor if you compare it to the amount of code that's in the repository that it has to read to actually implement the feature. It's it's very minor compared to that. So it's giving it the context, and it's giving it all the conventions, project conventions that we've defined, and specific implementation guidelines, and then the actual content itself. And it should have everything it needs to work away and start implementing that feature. So I'll let it run for the purpose of this video so that you can see what it's actually doing and correlate that to the work that we've just done, and hopefully you'll see that it's moving in the right direction and curtailing itself correctly with the context that we've given it. Feel free to skip ahead a little bit. The video should tell you where the various sections start and end, so if you want to get on to what happens in the next step, you can just forward the video. One thing that I can see it's added since the last time I used this is the plan agent, which is quite cool. Hopefully it's going to give me an execution plan before it actually starts doing anything. Well, we'll see. Okay, so now it's come up with a plan, so let's review that. Oh, users currently must manually copy paste work items between nodes to progress through stages. This feature adds workflow nodes. Okay, so it's just giving a summary of what the actual feature is, and then data model. Okay, very simple. Needs to add a workflow boolean to the metadata for the workflow nodes. Okay, so pretty much what I had thought. Store actions, declares workflow, remove from workflow. Clears as workflow, doesn't remove blueprint status. Okay. Yeah, well, I think we can accept that. I mean, if it wasn't a blueprint previously and then we remove workflow, it's still going to be a blueprint, which I think for a first version, we can get over that. Move to next parent, finds parent and grandparent workflow. Okay, fair enough. That its grandparent workflow is true. Okay, well, yeah, that's okay. It just avoids having an extra metadata on the step itself. I'm cool with that. Export pure helpers is workflow node. Yeah, fair enough. Well, we'll see in the code review afterwards. It might be able to reuse an existing function to test if a node is a blueprint node or not. Gets workflow step number. Okay. Use child workflow step. Okay. Get workflow context. Not sure what that's about. Well, let's let it run ahead and check what it does later on. So modify tree store, create workflow actions. Okay, yeah, that all seems fine. Blueprint command all seems fine. Yeah, I'm enjoying their new feature, but I think it might be a little bit redundant in terms of the changes that it's proposing. It's probably going to be pretty quick in doing them, and it's nicer to be able to review them directly in VS Code or whatever code editor you're using afterwards. And then phase 2 tests. Okay. So doesn't seem that it's done what we wanted and created the test first. It seems that it's actually gone ahead and done the store actions first, which is interesting. And it's doing that before it's doing the context menu integration. I guess that makes a certain amount of sense to cable up the store before we actually start adding unit tests. So yeah, sure. Again, let's skip over the nitty-gritty of the details and just view them directly in the code editor later. So context menu integration, yeah, that seems fine. And use no context menu, it's modifying as well, just wiring that up. Okay. Visual indicators, which it's putting into their own hook. Might be a little bit overkill. It depends on how much code it's putting in there. Maybe we can get that into another hook later on. We will see. And then modifying the no content. Okay, well, that's just the templating. It's fine. CSS styling. Doubt there on the placement. I don't see any relative positioning or anything like that. So I'm not sure it's gotten that right, but we'll be able to see that visually. So that's grand. Component tests. Okay, so I guess it's adding the integration testing at the end, which is what I asked it to do. And then it's doing all the verification that we asked. So it seems like it's taken into account our context. The only deviation is that it's decided the unit test after it's fired up the store. So let's go with that. Again, feel free to skip ahead while it's actually running through the implementation. So there we have it. It seems to have implemented everything. I don't know if you'd noticed, but it did not write the unit tests before it proceeded with the rest of the code. So I'm not too sure why it did it that way. It might just be that it didn't make sense to it. I don't know if TDD is a paradigm that's going to survive AI-assisted coding. I think what I'll do for my next feature is just define the actual tests as a separate step and run that independent of asking it to actually go ahead and code the feature, and just have it write those, review them, and then actually code it and see if that makes any difference to the workflow or not. Okay, so before we go and manually review the code, I do like to give it the opportunity to review the code since the last commit itself, because often actually comes out with some of the same things that I would want it to change after going over its own work. As well, it can be useful to give it the project conventions again, just to double check that it's actually adhered to them. And if it's just checking for that and not coding anything, it seems to be a little bit more attentive. You can see here I've defined an actions node, and all that is just a blueprint. It's not even a context. So it's just going to send those instructions directly to the terminal. So, it doesn't have any context attached to it. So let's do that. So you can see basically it's just sent it this content here and the conventions. Let's let that work away for a while. Yeah, classic with the comments. It can't seem to help itself, but to add the kind of comments I don't want it to add that aren't useful, it pretty much does it every time. So I have, yeah, that's why we have that in the project conventions. It usually catches them on this second pass. So I can see it's just cleaning up its functions a little bit. Probably following the project conventions around function size and reusability. So that's good. I'm glad I asked it to do this, because it probably would have taken me a lot more time to go through all of that by hand and tell it a lot of the same things. So I'm quite happy with this particular action. It is a big time saver. So what's it actually told us here? It's fixed some things. So it's removed the what comments. Right. The code is self-documenting via function names. Yeah, that's as per the project conventions. And toast messages. I'm not sure what it means by that, but we can check that in the code review afterwards. It's extracted inline logic to name function. Yeah, it's the function cleanup that we saw it do earlier on. It's fixed an import. There's no abandoned code. Good. Sometimes it does that, and you have to be careful, because it'll start on one thing and then it kind of figures out it doesn't work, so it'll take another tack, and the odd time it'll leave some abandoned code there. So it's good to just ask it to check that again. And then it's given us some refactoring opportunities. So low priority, it wants to move, it wants to create a shared move to step helper to save 15 lines of code. and it's saying itself that it's arguably more readable as is. Yeah, I'd kind of tend to agree with that. I don't think it's going to cause any maintainability issues, and it's probably going to be clear enough the way it is, so let's leave that. And then recommendation, not recommended now, but worth noting. Okay, saying this use node context menu file is too large. Yeah, 470 lines is starting to get a little bit big, and it's suggesting that we split it out. Yeah, that's a good idea, but let's do that at the end. I want to have a look at what's happening in VS Code first. Okay, so the first change is just to the actual Arbo project file itself, which I like to commit to the repo just to have a history of what we've actually been working on. So, okay, so you've got the CSS file for the node content where it's adding the visual indicators. And the first thing there that doesn't look okay is its display flex, where I was hoping it to be inline, which means that the actual icons are going to push out the node icons and text, which means it's going to be visually misaligned. Maybe we didn't specify that in the spec. Visual indicators, small place symbol to the left of the blueprint icon, and indeed we don't tell it that it needs to be an overlay and not inline, so that's my bad, but we can fix that. I think what we'll do at this point is just actually run the development version and give it a little test and see if there's any other things in the spec that it didn't get quite right, so that we can change those and then do the code review. Otherwise, we're just going to be doing double code review for nothing. So here we're running the development version of Arborescent, and let's create a workflow node. Oh, a little bug here that happens time to time where it doesn't capture the keyboard listeners, and I don't get it that often, but I should probably fix it. Can be for another day. So we've added our workflow node and the steps we need to declare it as a workflow. It doesn't seem that we're getting the add to workflow option here. So let's try to add it to a blueprint and then see if we have that option. Indeed we do. Now we can declare it as a workflow. So again, perhaps there's a hole in the spec there. And two things I've noticed here is that, like we thought from the CSS, that icon is pushing out the rest of the node so that it's not aligned. This icon here should be aligned with the little bar here that indicates where we are in the hierarchy. So we need to fix that. And the second thing is that it doesn't seem to have declared the children as steps. Well, it might have done internally, but it's not showing the icon to the left. So that's an issue. And actually, I'm just thinking about that, and I think we do have a little hole in our specification in here, in that the children themselves haven't been declared as blueprint elements, and I'm not sure if we've specified what happens in the case that there's children that are blueprint elements and children that aren't. What should it do? Should it add them all as blueprint elements, or should it just add them as steps even if they're not in the blueprint? Well, I suppose there's two ways we could handle that. We could either say add them all as blueprint. Just wondering if there's any kind of ramifications for that. Ramifications, rather. Probably not. We can always remove them if we want to. Or in the second idea is that we just leave them as non-blueprint nodes with a little icon overlay, but that's weird because then it's a checkbox for a task list, and they're not tasks, they're steps. So I think the coherent thing is when we declare a node as a workflow node, then we automatically add all the children that aren't currently in the blueprint to the blueprint. So I think the way to handle this is to update our specification and to run another pass. They're not actually bugs. It's done what we want. It's just there was a lack of clarity. So let's go back to the original spec and fix that. The first thing that we want to do here is for declaring a workflow, right click on a node that has a blueprint as a parent. Right click on any node. Only possible on immediate children of an existing blueprint node. Yeah, that's okay. A workflow node is automatically a blueprint node. And so adding a node as a workflow node automatically adds it as a blueprint node. Workflow cannot be created within any descendants of an existing workflow. That's fine. And we also need to tell it to add the children as workflow steps, which we only said here in the visual indicators, and we need to specify it during the workflow declaration. So all immediate children are automatically added as workflow steps. A workflow step is also a blueprint. If the workflow step wasn't a blueprint, then add it as a blueprint. Yeah, that should be okay. And then the other problem we had was that the icon should be inline. So visual indicator, small place symbol to the left of the blueprint icon does not replace it. Okay. Symbol overlaid. Line. And we just say it's important that it doesn't move the existing elements. Maybe we could just move that to the end. And for the workflow steps, we want them to be, well, they're numbered sequentially, that's fine. Centered and overlaid. Inline rather than line. And I think the thing to do here now is I don't actually have a context specific to tell the AI that the spec has been updated and to analyze and make any changes that haven't already been implemented. That's probably a good opportunity to add a context specific to that. But let's do that at another time. I mean, there's nothing stopping us from at any time, adding context directly into the terminal. So let's try it like that. So we basically want to tell it to analyze the specification and check any changes against what was implemented since last commit and implement any clarifications that have been added to the spec since that point. So I'm going to type out that prompt. And what we can do here is we can, instead of using the collaborate feature, we can just copy the content, and it's going to copy that as markdown, and we can just paste it directly into the terminal here. And we just let that work away and see how it reacts. So it's identified some gaps. All immediate children are automatically added as workflow steps. A workflow step is also a blueprint. If any workflow step is not already a blueprint, added as one. Yeah, it currently only sets his workflow on the node itself. It does not ensure children become blueprints. Yeah. Removing also removes children as workflow steps. Spec says removing a workflow should also remove children as workflow steps. Currently fully clears the workflow on the node itself. Since steps are derived dynamically, removing workflow does implicitly remove them as steps. But the spec also says children should be added as blueprints on declare, so those need not be reverted on remove. Blueprint status persists. Yeah, that's what we were saying earlier on, that the user can undo those later on if they like. Declaring a workflow, right click on the node that has a blueprint as a parent. Yeah, that's the clarification we added around the fact that it should add the children as well, especially including if they're non-blueprint modes, that it should automatically add them as blueprints. Yeah, and here's about the visual overlay. The spec says overlaid not inline for both the play icon and step numbers. Currently, they're rendered as separate spans. Yeah, okay, it's doing exactly what we've asked it to do. Step numbers described as black, white, and dark mode. Okay, yeah, there's something it missed itself, so it's good that it's fixing those. Go ahead. So here is a neat summary of the three things that we've asked it to do. So it's done a pretty good analysis of the changes that we've made. And the benefit of making those changes directly in the specification, as opposed to, just typing them out in the terminal, is that now we have an updated specification that we can use later on for documentation, or if we want to go back and if we want to create end-to-end tests, for instance, when the project is more mature, or if we decide to add features or make changes on top of an additional, an existing user story, we'll move this into our done items afterwards so that we will always have it for reference. Yeah, okay, it's going to run the full test suite. Probably need to do that. Now, the tests don't take that long to run, so that's fine. But if we had a context explicit to implementing clarifications to a specification, we could also say there, no need to run all of the tests, just run the tests for the feature. Okay, so it's done. Summary of the changes. Removed is blueprint prerequisite from workflow declaration. Great. Auto add children. Perfect. Make workflow indicators overlaid. Great. And the color change that I wanted to do, and it's updated the tests, which is good. So let's go ahead and see how those changes actually look. So we can see that that icon is now in line. It doesn't have the right positioning, but that's okay. We can go and manually edit that in the CSS ourselves afterwards, probably quicker. The steps aren't workflow steps, but that's happening during declaration time. So what we need to do is remove this from the workflow. Let's remove it from the blueprint as well, just to see if everything works from scratch. So we can add that back. Now it's not a blueprint, but we do have the declare as workflow menu option, which is what we wanted. And perfect. Yeah, it's adding, it's automatically turning those children into blueprint steps and also designating them as a workflow with the overlaid icon, which is, approaching the visual impact that we wanted it to have. While we're here, let's take the opportunity to test another few things. So what happens when we remove from workflow? That's working fine. What happens if a blueprint node, if a node isn't a blueprint node? It adds it as a blueprint node on declaration, that's fine. And what happens if we remove something from the blueprint? Well, it doesn't update the numbers, and I don't think we covered this in our specifications. It's an edge case. So I think what we should do here is just disable the option to remove a workflow node or workflow step from the blueprint. So let's add that back, and that works when we add it back. Now, what happens when we delete something? It updates the numbers. When we undo, it updates the numbers. And if we add another step, it doesn't automatically add it to the workflow, so it should. So that's another specification clarification that we need to give it. If we add that as a blueprint, it does update the steps. And if we change the order, it does update the order here. So there's only a couple of things there that we need to add. And I think what we're going to do is we're just going to tell it here, and we're going to update manually in the spec because it's only a couple of small things. So So we've said disable or remove from blueprint option from the context menu for workflow nodes and workflow steps. They can only be removed from the blueprint once they are removed from the workflow. Let's just copy and paste this here, and we can make another node here for edge cases. Actually, the thing to do would just be type it in here and then just copy paste it into the terminal, but that's okay. And the second thing we wanted to do was that adding a child node to our workflow automatically declares it as a blueprint and adds it as a workflow step. And just one more thing that I'm thinking that we didn't check. We didn't check that no descendants are added as steps. So let's remove this as a workflow, and then we'll go add a descendant, and then we will declare as workflow, and that's working fine. So I think we've just got these two to cover for now. So we wanted to add these two edge cases. Let's let that work away. So just one thing around running code review, I think I need to make it explicit in my own workflow, and I can do that once I implement this feature, that it's better to manually test the visual changes before we actually go and do the code review, because there will invariably be clarifications to the specification that we need, and add a context specific to that as well. Again, running the full test suite. So yeah, I could have told it not to do that or attach another context, but that's okay. So it's finished, it's disabled, removed from blueprint for workflow nodes and steps, and it's auto declared new children of workflows blueprints. So let's go ahead and test that. Okay, well, it's got that one right. Okay, we can't remove it. We can't remove it from the blueprint. We can remove it from the workflow, and then if we do that, we can remove the children from the blueprint, and we can remove the workflow from the blueprint. And if we, yeah, well, that's normal. If you remove a parent from the blueprint, then all the descendants would also be removed because the blueprint has to be attached to the root node. And then if we declare that as workflow, that all seems to be working as expected. So we're good. Last thing I want to do here is just to update the CSS by hand, just to reposition those icons so that they look a little more visually appealing. Okay, well, I'm not sure why it's putting in tops there when it's already aligning the items in the center. So let's just remove that from the workflow indicator and from the step number. And then also I want to offset them a little bit more, quite a bit more actually to the left. Let's try 10px on both and see how that works out. Yeah, that's pretty much what I had in mind. That looks good. So now let's carry on with the rest of our code review. Okay, so node context. All right, so it's adding the play icon from Lucid. It's got to use hook for the workflow indicator. As we saw, yeah, it made its own hook for that, so I'm not sure if that was necessary, but we can check it later. It's adding the icon. Now it's adding the play icon here. Probably at some point I'll want to have a UI element that handles icons, but we don't have so many of them of that type overlaid for now, so probably leave that until later. And here is just adding the step number. It's fine. It hasn't updated the tests for that, and it's an annoying thing that Claude does. It's whenever I ask it to do a refactor, it doesn't think of updating tests for existing files. It seems to add them for new files. And actually, while I'm thinking, I should probably just add that here in the actions, because we did do a review since last commit earlier. So sure. Let's ensure that we've updated tests for all edited files. Okay, so let's just collapse that, and what we want to do here is just tell it to do the refactor. Actually, we're in the context here, so here is our refactor workflow node. So add tests for edited files, and that one was node context, I think. Yeah. Otherwise, it looks okay. So use blueprint submenu. Okay. Interesting. It's getting two helper functions here from actions from the store. And we do also have node helpers file. They should probably be in there. So just grab those names. Like the helpers really is for pure functions, so I'm going to ask a question and just let it analyze itself whether or not those are pure functions. Sometimes good to frame it as a question rather than a demand, just in case we're doing something that we shouldn't be doing. Test for workflow step, that's fine. Can declare context as workflow. Yeah, okay, so whether or not we display those menu items. Looks good. And again, no tests. Hopefully the updated context will avoid doing that next time. Use node context menu, okay. Oh yeah, that's the big file I was talking about earlier that could do with a refactor, and it's not wrong. Anyway, let's see what's in there. Is child of workflow step get workflow context again, declaring those in actions instead of node helpers. So I think what we'll do is just say for what's the name of the file? Workflow actions. Okay. Okay. Truncate label. What's it doing there? Oh, next step, previous step. Seems to be grabbing the content from the node and adding it on after next step and previous step, which we didn't tell it to do or not to do. Let's go see what has actually happened. It's on the... All right, okay. Yeah, no, I don't want that because visually we can see the steps and they have to add a truncate thing. If the node text is long, it's not going to make any sense and we don't need it. It's adding complexity. Okay. And also we didn't check that it works earlier on, so let's just have a quick look. Okay, so no next step once it's at the end. And no previous step once it's at the start. And we don't need this little dash here to separate, so let's tell it that. Okay. So where were we? And use node context menu. In any case, it should have added that truncate label to the node helpers as a pure function. Or actually, I think I've got a generic util helper. Yeah, we're going to remove it, so it doesn't matter. Okay, technically, it's something we forgot from the feature. So yeah, I guess we can just add that quickly. Next, previous, next step, previous. Okay. Step. Actually, that counts for both. Just update it for future uses. Now, otherwise, yeah, it's just calculating the menu items and when to display them. And it's just updating the conditions on the existing blueprints to check whether or not those are workflow nodes. So I'm okay with that. It might complicate Refactor a little bit because we did want to refactor this file, but let's ask it to do it and see what it comes out with. And I think I'm just going to give it some generic refactor instructions and just ask it refactor into smaller files. It's getting big. Okay. And how would we do that? I suppose file per submenu item. We might already have some of those, I think. Go to, yeah, not sure, like there's use node editing already. Maybe not. Okay, we'll see what it comes out with. And yeah, otherwise okay. So use, oh, hold on. No tests, of course. So now the workflow indicator, and yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. It seems to have created a small independent file. Could have possibly added that in somewhere else, but it seems to be pretty well encapsulated. And it's nothing to do with the context menu, so we don't want to add. We don't want to have like an overall use workflow hook. So I think that's fine. It can live there. And yeah, it's encapsulated already quite well with test specific to that feature, so that's neat. I'm okay with that. So the tree store is just registering the actions. Yep, that's okay. We don't test this. This is more just a kind of like a master import action registry. And okay, well, here's where the meat is in the workflow actions itself. And already we can see that, yeah, there's quite a lot of helper functions there. Or other. Debatable whether or not they should be in an actions file. They should probably be in node helpers, and node helpers is kind of getting a bit long, so you know we might need to have a refactor of that if we want to move them, maybe like blueprint workflow helpers, something like that. And let's see what it comes up with. Let's just say it should be in a helpers file. I don't want to get into a big refactor now. Let's see what it suggests. Maybe it's going to create a new one. Get workflow context. Oh, what is this doing? Grandparent. Okay. So it's returning information about where that node is and what his parents and grandparents are, which is fine, but we already used the term context explicitly in Arborescent to describe functionality, so I think that the naming there can get confusing because it's nothing to actually do with the context mechanism. It's just trying to get some information about what's happening with that node. So, yeah. And we're in workflow actions. It's poorly named. Let's get to find another name for that. Yeah, again, more helper functions. Here, it's actually creating the actions itself. Okay. That's what I was talking about earlier on when it's talking about the toast messages. But I mean, if those conditions, if we're actually putting in blocks so that those conditions don't, you know, we don't actually display those actions if those conditions are true, then what's the point in showing helper messages, we're never going to see them. I think. Let's ask it what that's about. So yeah, create workflow actions. Yeah, okay. Question. Mhm. Next step, last step. So, okay, it's important that these are undoable, redoable, and it's adding them into the command store. And we've already checked that that's the case earlier. So should be okay. It's testing. Oh, that's a lot of tests. Okay, well, usually I would review them, honestly. This video is getting a bit long, so I'm going to skip that because we would be here for a while. Blueprint command. Yeah, it's just updating the blueprint command store with the conditions for whether or not the nodes are workflows. That's fine, except I don't know if we test the commands. Right. Yes. So hasn't done that. Otherwise, it's okay. Node helpers, that's the test. Let's look at the helpers first. Okay, so here it's updating the blueprint inheritance to take into account whether or not the parent is a workflow. Yeah, that's fine. And it's adding a test for that. Good. So now that we've done our code review, let's go and ask it to make those changes. And as we can see here, we have a context specific to refactoring, which is just asking to perform the tasks. Challenge the user if the refactor ideas are not consistent with the project conventions, and then run the standard checks. So one thing I do like to do before I do a refactor is just to add the code to the staging area. We're not committing it yet. And the reason I do that is because we've just reviewed it all and I don't want to have to review it all again. I only want to review the actual changes that the AI is going to make once we send it the items to refactor. So let's do that. We already have our context attached. Actually, I need to, there's an explicit context attached, so let's remove that. And then it inherits the refactor context from the main node. So let's go ahead and do that. I must have had some need to review refactor context in a previous feature. Okay, so doesn't seem to have taken that into account. Yeah, I think our session is getting a little bit old, so let's exit that and start a new one. It's probably no harm to have a different context window anyway for our refactor. So you can see it's just reminding again of the project conventions and asking it to perform the following refactoring tasks and then giving it the list of tasks. Let that chug away. So let's give you some feedback here on the things that we've asked it to do for workflow helper functions. It agrees they're all pure functions. Okay, so he's going to create a workflow helpers alongside node helpers, which is good because that was getting a bit full. Get workflow context is agreed that it's confusing. So get workflow step position, yeah, that's much more coherent. And in the toast messages, yes, indeed, they are unreachable because there are already guards in place. Remove the defensive toast, but keep the early returns for safety. Fair enough. Truncate label, okay, it's the change that I asked it to make. That's cool. And use no context menu file splitting. Yes, it does agree with that. And it's extracting build workflow step items. Use workflow step submenu. Build set context submenu. Use set context submenu. Because there's already a pattern that it's identified as one file per submenu. Great. Oh, I'm glad I committed my changes to staging because that would have been a nightmare I would have had to review all the code again. So So let's go back and verify those changes that it's actually made. And I had a little bit of a blip when making this video in that I've already reviewed the changes, but I forgot to enable the voice for the microphone and it didn't record the audio, and I've already added them to the staging area, so I can't actually review the changes it's made now. But what we can do is just very quickly check what we've asked it to do and then check that it has actually done that in the files that are in the staging area. So we wanted to add tests for edited files, so node context.tsx. I'm not seeing any tests. Okay. Actually, yeah. Okay, so yeah, let's add a test for that. Let's add a test. Oh, no. Not seeing the test for use node context menu. Oh yeah, because it's refactored it actually and it's moved stuff out. So let's put those tests elsewhere. So we have tests for the set context submenu. We have tests for the workflow step submenu, and it's added those into separate files. And it's added a file per submenu, which is what we wanted it to do. So that's good. Helper functions and workflow actions. Yes, workflow helpers. Great. And then in the workflow actions file itself, just got the actions and the action creation. And then we've got some functions that are not pure functions, so they're actually doing things. Yeah, that's fine. And then in use no context menu, did it remove the truncated label? Okay. Yeah, well, I guess that is in workflow submenu, and I don't see that anymore. So that's good. Let's just see if. Okay. Oh, we forgot to add it through this little dash. It did the refactor, and we asked it to do on the large file, and then in workflow actions, get workflow context is poorly named. Not sure where that is. I guess it's moved it into workflow helpers. Yeah. Get workflow step number. That's much better. Yeah, so it seems to have done everything we wanted, and I've already added all of those to the staging area. So we've just got 2 minor changes now, and then we should be good to go. So let's do those straight away. I think I'm just going to paste them in directly. So it does forget things, and sometimes forget things twice. So you do need to be attentive in code reviews and just make sure that It's checking everything. So what's its excuse? It's saying it's purely template rendering, adding the workflow indicator and step number, and their visual concerns. It would need integration or component level tests with React rendering. Yes, and I explicitly told it to skip integration tests for critical and just use them for critical workflows only, and that the rendering logic is already covered by the hook tests. Yeah. I think I made that choice because we're in a beta version and I didn't want to take the time to do that because we're just going to need to break and redo all those tests later on once we add functionality resulting from user feedback. So that's fair enough. So yeah, it's just made a minor change, which I've already added to the staging area. So all we need to do now is just do a last visual review. Let's remove from the workflow and let's remove a node from the blueprint. Let's redeclare the workflow. Add a node. Move a node around, numbering stays intact. Can't remove it from the blueprint if it's a workflow step. And then next step and previous step work fine. And if we remove everything from the workflow, it removes the children as well. Looks good. So let's just commit our work. And finally, we've made some changes to our blueprint node here, to our blueprint nodes. So what I want to do is export that. So we can export the blueprint to the blueprints folder, and we can overwrite the existing React Electron blueprint, which is an example of well, it's basically it's my own blueprint that I use to construct this project, but with all of the actual content stripped apart from the blueprint nodes itself. We can give you an idea what that looks like with all the nodes stripped. So it's just the pure blueprint, and that's good for anybody who wants to start a new project. Actually, let's just collapse everything so that we just have the base layout that people can see when they first open it up. Save that. And push, and we're done. So now you've seen a fairly complex feature developed with Arborescent and Claude Code. Probably took about 2 hours between all the stops and starts to get this done. And probably a feature like that would take maybe 2 or 3 days, including tests for senior developers. So we can see that with the combination of Claude Code and Arborescent, we've managed to achieve a fairly significant productivity boost. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you use it. If you have any questions about the tool, feel free to let me know in the comments. If you have any critique of my development practices, also feel free to tell me in the comments, or even better, go ahead and grab the blueprint file and make changes to the context that, or the conventions that you think would be appropriate, and make a merge request, and I'd be delighted to have a look at it. Thanks for listening.